soybean production, one of the main things that we need to consider in soybean production is fertility. The only way we're really going to know about the fertility of our soil is by soil testing. We can make some assumptions, but usually they're wrong. If you soil test and then follow those soil test recommendations, then it will help the producer in putting the proper inputs without contributing to pollution or having problems with having applied too much of one of the nutrients. Now, when we talk about soil testing, we need to do that in the fall so we have time to either add lime or make those amendments prior to planting. Also, when we talk about soil testing, there's a lot of things that we need to consider. When I think about soil testing, I look at what the crop is going to use, and then we need to soil test on a regular basis to see if we're depleting the soil or if we're meeting the needs of that crop without depleting the soil. Another thing is inoculation, and we'll talk a lot about inoculation. But again, if you don't do this prior to planting or at planting with the seed, then there's no way to apply that inoculant after the seed has been planted, and you would have to apply nitrogen as its source if you don't inoculate. We talk about fertility. Typically, soybeans will use about 4 pounds of nitrogen per bushel that's harvested. So when we remove 50 bushels of soybeans, that means that we would have had to apply 200 pounds of nitrogen. Phosphorus, about 0.8 of a pound, and potassium, 1.4 pounds per harvested bushel. Soybean inoculant. Why do we inoculate? Soybeans are legumes, and therefore they're capable of fixing nitrogen through a symbiotic relationship with a bacterium. Bradyrhizobium japonicum is a bacterium that, if it's available to the soybean plant, will fix nitrogen in a form that it can utilize in its production. As you know, soybean is to grow are one of the least expensive crops because nitrogen is very costly as far as an input in production. There's about 500 billion bacterium per acre. So you can see there's a lot of bacteria that's out there that's available to the soybeans, but it has to be the right genus and species for the soybean plants that we're growing. There's a lot of things that take place in soybeans and these inoculants. First, the seed give off a pheromone, isoflavonoid, and then the bacteria respond by giving off a sugar. And then the roots will take and actually respond by wrapping around that bacteria, which it captures it within that root hair. Then the bacteria starts to divide until the point that it penetrates that root hair, and then a small nodule is formed. Once this nodule is formed, the bacteria continue to divide, and then we have a large nodule that will be available to fix nitrogen from the atmosphere. The nodules fix nitrogen in the absence of oxygen. So we have leg hemoglobin. So basically it binds with this oxygen. When we do, it's kind of like with the blood. When you see this activity taking place, you'll see this reddish or pinkish color in that nodule. When we see that pinkish color, then we know that it's actually fixing nitrogen. Now these nodules don't last the entire season. They're constantly replenishing themselves, so some will be starting to die out while other new ones are starting to form. It takes approximately 7 to 14, or this is some of the research has shown, to be efficient in fixing nitrogen for the plant. But the faster the nodulation and the larger and the more efficient these nodules are, then the higher production. Typically, we will see these nodules start to form, or we should be able to find them by about V2, and we'll talk about that. As the second trifoliate starts to unroll, you should be able to find nodules on the plant roots. A lot of factors will affect nodulation. Optimum soil pH. If we get low soil pH, it will have an influence on the availability and how efficient they are. Soil temperatures, soil textures, lighter soils, we may have to make sure that we replenish these on a regular basis. Typically, if we planted soybeans within 3 to 5 years, then we would not need to inoculate our seed. Some people inoculate every year since that we have newer strains of inoculant that are more efficient at fixing nitrogen. The problem is they're not as persistent in the soil as our native populations. So I would encourage people on somewhat of a regular basis to try some of the new inoculants. Also, if we think about environmental impact, the soybeans will actually leave some residual nitrogen for other plants that we would plant in a rotation. There's a big difference, as you can see, from a non-treated plant where one has been treated with inoculants. You'll see the nodules that have been formed on the main root.